hyperbolic in nature?
Well, I think it's slightly complex, far more complex than that. Operation Sindoor is over now. And you see, dissent is a fundamental bedrock of our democracy. Now, why do we have United Nations? United Nations was made possible by all the people who didn't want war, the dissenters. So I think a freedom of speech essentially means this very kind of speech. It's not a question of whether one would agree with him or disagree with him. People must have the freedom of speech, and if the antidote to allegedly bad speech is more speech. Now, you have this professor talking about Muslims not being cared enough. Perhaps if the BJP government in Haryana wanted to counter it, they perhaps would have started talking about various schemes that the government has for Muslims specifically. In fact, it's a fact that a lot of BJP governments have wonderful schemes for Muslims, which practically nobody knows about. So they start talking about it, and then there is a Muslim poor parent who looks at it, and then he says, "Oh my God, I was not aware of this," and then he starts applying for that scheme, educates his or her child, and then goes about telling that the education was made possible by this scheme. So there's a reason why we have chosen freedom of speech, and that is because when there is uncomfortable or whatever kind of freedom of speech that somebody exercises, if you don't like it, then please counter it. And instead, what just happened now is that you have sedition coming back. By the way, sedition at this point of time, Section 124 of the Indian Penal Code was halted by the Honorable Supreme Court, but now you have Section 152 of the BNS saying exactly far worse things. There's life imprisonment, and that must be the reason why this particular FIR was reported around the world. Now, what happens is our stature comes down, and investment is also likely to come down because investment would require a very democratic climate. People must be free to express their views. And there are people who don't want war. And I don't think anybody in this country, the ones who govern, could say that all of the country should come together to support it. It's an occupational hazard when somebody chooses to enter into politics, when somebody chooses to become the prime minister, or when somebody chooses to get into the army. Whatever they do, believing that is the best for the country, might not be something that everybody agrees in. That's the occupational hazard. And I'm slightly disappointed with the fact that the Supreme Court did not stay the investigation because two things. I don't think anybody was alleging that this man, this particular professor was on the take, that there was anybody sponsoring him to say these things. Unless and until there was an allegation of that nature, it simply would have been futile to continue this investigation. What is this investigation going to uncover at any rate? That professor certainly will have 100 different ways to say that he was justified in saying what he said. He could perhaps say that, look, take the case of UP, the largest state in the country. How many Muslim ministers do we have? In fact, forget ministers. How many Muslim candidates were even given tickets by the BJP to contest? They could take one instance like that and then harp about it for 10 years. That's called freedom of speech. And that is the occupational hazard that we all signed up for when we wanted India to be a democracy. And war. There are people against war. Now, Operation Sindoor, well, let's take the government's word at face that according to the government, Operation Sindoor is going to give us lasting security, or for that matter, it has sent a powerful deterrent enough. Now, there could be some other professor who would say that, wait, I don't think much is happening under the present dispensation, which is any different from the previous dispensation. Somebody could give you data and say, look at what happened from 2014 to 2018. Those were the 5 years before Article 370 was abrogated in 2019. And we also had the attack, the Pahalgam, I think that was a Pahalgam. I'm sorry if I'm not getting the attack on our soldiers that happened in 2019. So between 2014 and 2018, 1,450 killings happened in Kashmir. From 2019 to date, we have something like 1,350 killings. So there are people who could give you this data and say that perhaps we still are struggling with the issue in Kashmir. And there are people who would certainly look at the kind of indebtedness India has gone into. Look, in the last 10 years. Now, this has nothing to do with the current administration. I'm very confident that had it been UPA or some ABC or anyone else, they would have done exactly the same. We've spent $500 billion on our security. And as a result and by the way, when we were spending this much of money between 2017 and 2021, we were the biggest defense spenders in the world. Now, look where it has taken us. This year, I'm talking of 2024-25, the budgeted figures show that we paid almost 12 lakh crore rupees as interest. That is 38% of our revenue, which is just 31 lakh crore rupees. And which other country in the world pays so much as a proportion of their revenue? There are only 4 countries, according to the World Bank data. All 4 countries are incidentally bankrupt. So, this is a time to worry about. This is a time to talk about war. Are we better off with these wars? And by the way, the South India, I mean, I'm in Bangalore talking to you from. The 5 states are said to be the economic engine of India. You know how much revenue they earned just last year? Or for that matter, 2024-25, it was 10 lakh 40,000 crore rupees. That's much less than the central government pays as interest towards the debt that we have taken. So there are people who should be, dissent is a defining feature of our democracy. And I don't think anybody in the army should take offense to what this tweet was. The best thing would have been to ignore it if it was like in any manner injurious. And at the same time, I'm also talking about another thing, which is, look, we can't have misinformation. Now, if somebody deliberately puts out a tweet that says 1,000 civilians in Kashmir was killed during this Operation Sindoor, you obviously will have to attack them under the law. You will have to charge them. You will have to make an example out of them because you got to arrest them. And you got to send a message to people who put out such deliberate misinformation that it will not be tolerated, because that misinformation is very dangerous. If somebody were to put out misinformation of that nature, what will happen is the civilians in Kashmir will take back will go back to the stones, and they will hit up the security forces in self-preservation or self-defense. The security forces will again fire, and we will have volatile situation there. Now that's misinformation that will have to be dealt with. But this professor's tweet, I honestly don't believe it was anywhere close to that. It's entirely possible that the government, might have inside information that would suggest the professor was on the take. If that's the case, please shame him. He's not some royalty. Please put out that information. Please charge him with that. Please accuse him of that and say that and tell that to the court. So short of that, I honestly don't believe what the Supreme Court did today was right, because it's important for people to be able to dissent. It's important for people to be able to say that, look, the war, any operation is always political, because I tell you, you go over to any political science library, you will find credible books, credible scholarly research that will show that a good number of wars in the past, a good number of conflicts in the past, not necessarily of India, or for that matter, not really of India, have something to do with politics far more than they did have to do with securing the borders, because people wage wars to prop up their political status. This is something every political professor, science professor will teach to his children. So what's really the harm if somebody were to say that, oh, this particular operation also had something to do with politics? I think we don't need to welcome views like that. We also don't need to punish views like that. You just let them float in the information space. And it's important. I would have thought the BJP government in Haryana could have engaged with this individual with more tweets. Officially, they could have, I was really hoping that they would do it, because I know for a fact that the BJP government in Haryana, and in fact, it's true, the BJP government in a good number of states have wonderful programs for the minorities, specifically Muslim scholarships and all of that. And it's also true that it's simply not, people are not really aware of it, and almost every year the report comes out that the funds were not utilized due to lack of demand. Is it that Muslims are not poor enough? No, it's just that they didn't know. Perhaps this was an occasion the BJP government in Haryana could have taken to talk about it, and probably even embarrass this particular professor, because it's entirely possible he was not aware of that data.
All right. Okay. Well, let's take quick concluding thoughts from all our panelists, starting with Mr. Mehta.